And so the compromise that brought some balance into who was going to be our national government between the North and the South was that slaves were going to be considered three-fifths persons for the purpose of the census, which would determine members of Congress, and for the Electoral College, which would go to selecting the President of the United States. So America was the culmination of Europe's settler colonial perspective. And what that means is that as you discover new territories, you take it from the indigenous people and you subjugate them to whatever treatment you find necessary in order to seize control of those areas. The U.S. Supreme Court had recognized in Dred Scott versus Sanford in the 1850s that Black people had no standing for redress in federal courts because they could not be citizens, because they were not recognized as people. The magnitude of the reparation destroyed the German economy, created hyperinflation in Germany. The whole famous old TV reels of people having a wheelbarrow of Deutschmarks and going to get a loaf of bread. Yeah. Hunger, destitution was rampant in Germany in the 1920s. Germany had never been destitute. And so here they were. All of a sudden, what had been a great nation was deeply impoverished, which opened the door to them electing Adolf Hitler. And the Soviets lost 8.7 million Red Army soldiers. And if you include civilian deaths, the death toll was anywhere between 20 million, that's the minimum, cut across all historians, up to 27 million. That level of sacrifice was recognized by President Kennedy in 1963 in his famous speech on peace, where he said no nation in the history of war had ever suffered more than the Soviet Union did in World War II. 80% of the fighting was on the Eastern Front. It was the fact that the Soviet Union refused to surrender that broke the back of the Nazi military machine. We dropped an atomic bomb on civilian populations in Japan, killing tens of thousands. And we did it twice. Historians debate whether it was necessary. Let me be plain from an editorial perspective. The rationale for dropping the bomb was to save the number of American lives it would have taken for the American forces to have gone on the island of Japan and bring Japan to surrender. But the Red Army had already taken care of that mission. It would not have been U.S. forces going door to door on the island of Japan. The Red Army was willing to do it. No. We sowed the seed for the Cold War by dropping atomic bombs on Japan to send a signal to Stalin, you're next. Think about that. Imagine if the United States in a world war had sacrificed 8.7 million U.S. soldiers, and our ally in that war rebuilt the enemy who killed 8.7 million Americans. How would we feel? Because this is exactly what we did to them. I am a U.S. Army veteran. I cannot even fathom the level of sacrifice that the Red Army engaged in, that we benefited from. Let us not be confused. This is what started the Cold War. We did, by betraying the greatest ally America has ever had. Do we remember how we felt when the former Soviet Union put nuclear missiles in Cuba? What exactly are we doing with all these nuclear missiles on the border of Russia? This is our commitment to inequality. What's good for us is not good for you. We can treat you any way, and don't you dare treat us any other way. Goldman Sachs themselves got paid $15 billion in 2009, while 8 million of us lost our homes, while pensions lost 2/3 of their values. U.S. pensions lost almost $1 trillion by buying these garbage mortgage-backed securities from Wall Street, and none of them got bailed out. But the Obama administration and Timothy Geithner as Treasury Secretary paid Wall Street 100 cents on the dollar on those credit default swaps that put AIG into bankruptcy. Unheard of in the history of bankruptcy law. This is inequality. For the wealthy, they get what none of us could ever get. By the time you got to the end of 2020, the actual GDP of the economy, Main Street, contracted 3.5%, twice as much as 2008, 2009. You haven't had a contraction of the U.S. economy of 3.5% since 1935, in the middle of the Great Depression. So that's what the economics did in 2020, because we shut down 80% of the economy for 3 or 4 months and then slowly start opening it up. How did Wall Street do? The Dow Jones Industrials went up 7.9%. Now again, this is compared to a contraction of 3.5%. The S&P 500 went up 16%. Okay, so that's the big companies. The whole economy contracted 3.5%. The Russell 2000, small caps, went up 18%. In fact, today, the median middle-class household cannot afford to buy a home in the average American city for the first time in U.S. history.